Hey guys, this is Mikro. I wanted to talk about light and medium optimization in terms of damage mitigation effects, and with that in particular, I want to look at artifacts today. We're going to be comparing things like the Tumbler Feetwraps and Featherweight, as well as Void Darkplate for medium users. So we're going to be doing that light to medium setup for optimization. I'm not going to be looking at unyielding today because in order to look at unyielding, I need to be able to factor in random crit chance from actual relevant weapons that do damage to you. In order to do that, I would need to update the simulation I wrote for last patch, which I'll do within probably a week or two. And then once that's done, I'll be able to see how unyielding would be able to fare versus things like the Abyss, a Fire Staff, and those like kind of common DPS builds that you see in the game. So a few quick PSAs before we get into this. The wall, if you have been farming that, this chromatic ward is still bugged on the live patch, so it effectively does nothing. So using the walls is just in general a detriment. You're not actually able to dodge with your offhand with this either, so if you're a tank player, I would not recommend like using the wall, but it's still a good thing to farm and have sit in your inventory until, or for when they fix this chromatic ward, and then the wall will actually be somewhat useful. And then you guys have been killing it. We got to 4K subs. There's been a lot of new people, and we've broken that 23 to 24% subscribed to not subscribed ratio, but I think we can get to 25. Trying to see if we can get up to that. So if you're not something to watch a lot of these videos, please consider doing so. And with that being said, let's get into the analysis for this. So there's two things that are kind of helpful, or like one sheet in particular that's helpful that I have within my Discord, and this is like the armor calculations optimization for 700 gear score. So this is basically saying, hey, if you want to optimize your medium armor class, you need to go a medium chest, heavy head, heavy hands, heavy legs, heavy feet, and that will be the optimal weight class for medium for the current patch. So there's stuff like that. For featherweight, but there's stuff like that that is contained within Discord that I think can be kind of helpful, and I'm going to be using that today to kind of get a better sense of what will be optimal in terms of damage mitigation. There's also this for other armor sets that aren't featherweight, so just shout out to the Discord again. If you go to the Discord, uh, and then you go to the resources tab, this is something that is right here, this New World Armor Calculator, 700 gear score. So if you want to try to optimize your build, it's like a useful thing to do that, and you don't really have to think about much at all. So that's useful. And then let's start getting into the graphs. So basically, this is like the setup that I did before for the last video, but I'm gonna make it hopefully a little bit easier to understand. What I have here in this first spot, I tried to put labels, but it wasn't working for Desmos. So this first spot here, this is your light armor class from a base perspective, the in blue, and the red here is armor mitigation. So as your armor goes up, you're going to mitigate more damage due to armor, and this is the actual calculation for how that is done. I did factor in 200 con and 50 con bonuses as well because I find those to likely be consistent to be run for every single build. So that's just times 1.2 where that's actually going up. And I have graphs down here that I'm going to be going into for other builds later on. So we have light here, we have medium here. We could already tell if you are in medium, you're going to be basically taking a 20% less damage than you would be if you are in right. It's a little, or I guess not 20%, it's like 14% less damage in medium than you are in light, just based off a base armor class alone. So that's like that bonus that you get from going to light to medium that you feel from an optimized standpoint. If we actually look at this for featherweight, in light, you're going to be taking uh, an additional 5% less damage if you are compared to your other light classes. And if you're trying to do featherweight and medium, you're not going to be getting much of a bonus. You're going to get like a 1% damage mitigation bonus. So you can already tell based off of this that going for featherweight and medium doesn't really make a lot of sense. But going to featherweight and light provides a pretty significant damage boost. Now, this 5% doesn't seem super impactful, but the thing that this kind of benefits the most is this uses your based armor class, and that's multiplied by all these other bonuses, right? So that like times 1.2 factor, that's going to be multiplied, or your actual armor class value is going to be multiplied by that 1.2, so you're just going to effectively get more value. So for like if you're playing like a light SNS build, for example, because SNS has a passive that will actually increase the amount of armor that you have. If you look for sturdy shield here, where you're getting an extra 15% physical armor, that like bonus will additionally apply to that base featherweight armor and will make it even more tanky. So that times like 1.2 that you see here, this would be times 1.35. So that would be even better. And that's something that you can take advantage of for a light build to try to increase this further, or you can run effects like Fortify, and then that value will be multiplied effectively by that Fortify value, and it will just go up significantly. So in light, like Featherweight is very, very good for being tanky and is likely the most optimal thing to go for. But let's look at things like Void Darkplate now. Now, Void Darkplate, you're not going to be able to run this in light, obviously, because it's a heavy oriented piece, but we can compare it in medium, and you can see there's a pretty big difference between running the kind of Featherweight and the Void Darkplate mitigation. So if you're running Void Darkplate in medium, you're going to be taking a 47% of the damage is incoming, and then versus if you are running the Featherweight, you're going to be taking 44%. So Void Darkplate is just completely optimal for that kind of medium-oriented class over the uh, Featherweight bonus, which shouldn't surprise too many people, but it's nice to be able to confirm that. So if you are playing like one of those medium setups, I would recommend Void Darkplate over the Featherweight if you're looking for consistent damage mitigation. But then there's another side of things where you're looking at Tumbler Feetwraps, and you see all of a sudden, wait a second, that Tumbler Feetwraps is actually better than the Void Darkplate in medium, and that is true. But you have to consider how often that uptime for the Shirking Blessing is proccing, where you gain that 24% fortify for 5 seconds. Oh, actually, I messed this up. It should be a 25. It should be a little bit higher than that. So yeah, it's a little bit better. So from like an optimal standpoint, again, this blue graph is the base. This green is the featherweight. Since we know featherweight doesn't matter in medium, we can get rid of those and just not really think about it. And this red is if you have nothing, right? So if you are kind of playing that medium-oriented setup, you are going to be gaining an extra like 1%, maybe 1.5% like damage mitigation, or I guess it's 1.7% damage mitigation if you are running that featherweight from an optimal standpoint. But depending on the uptime, it may kind of go down a bit. I think realistically, most people will have featherweight up roughly like 60% of the time, or not featherweight, sorry, they would have Tumbler Feetwraps up like around 60% of the time. And in that case, the Void Darkplate will be providing a bigger damage mitigation bonus pretty consistently by about 10%. So, but if you are someone that's like constantly in those melee fights and you aren't spending time like running to the battlefield, because if you spend time running to the battlefield, you're effectively going to be taking more damage from range. So if I'm thinking like OPR, for example, if I'm in OPR, I don't think that Tumbler Feetwraps gets as much value because the time that you spend running, you're not going to be spending dodging as much. So you're going to have a lower proc time on that Tumbler Feetwraps. So Tumbler Feetwraps is better. This is like king for melee versus melee duels. But if you are playing versus more ranged players, I think that Void Darkplate is better. So that's kind of the conclusion from a defensive standpoint. That being said, there are other bonuses for going from the Tumbler Feetwraps. If you go for that Tumbler Feetwraps in medium, for example, you're also going to be healing based off your max HP. So if you're someone that's like playing without a healer a lot, this could be very, very powerful. You also gain a damage bonus, which is very solid, like a 15% in power. It does have an internal like 1 second cooldown on it now, but that still does not take away for how strong those Tumbler Feetwraps are. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, but not get into the math for today, is that some people have been considering for that light setup for the uh, kind of featherweight oriented setup to drop featherweight and instead go for nimble coat for CDR from a healer perspective. And just know that if you're doing that and you're not stacking that kind of fortify based effects, if you're not running that orbit protection, for example, you're not going to be losing too much. But if you are playing for those some fortify based bonuses, you are going to be losing a lot by going for the setup. So just know that if you aren't playing for those fortify based setups, you probably should be doing so with a featherweight build in order to optimize how much mitigation that you're going to be getting out of that and like the value that you'll get out of that. But if you're not doing so, going for nimble coat is not a huge deal. You just need to have accurate warding with your gem slots, and you need to make sure that you have good base damage reduction effects like elemental aversion or enchanted ward. Both of those are very effective for light players, and that's what you should be playing to optimize for rather than optimizing from an armor value perspective for those builds in particular. The mitigations are also something that people have been considering a lot. So like strike mitigation or strike conditioning, is like something that people have been considering a lot, and like these kind of base effects because it got buffed to 5%. Just know that the first hit that you take from this will not proc it, but after that it will proc. So these are actually kind of sleeper perks, and some people would consider the conditionings for particular metas to be better than the base damage reduction effects like elemental aversion, enchanted ward. And the reason why is this is old fortify, and if we go back to that like original kind of gross graph, which I have to make a comment on because I messed this up in the last video, this plus here is actually a multiply, which makes a really big difference because now 4 to 5 stacking is actually good. That's something that wasn't contained within this before and should have been contained within that, but we didn't test this formula for like probably a year-ish because it was just accurate for a long time. It seems like that changed at some point. But in terms, I kind of lost my train of thought there. But in general, that mitigation stuff, the reason why it's good is because it goes into this different bucket, this ABS bucket, and there is nothing, or uh, not that bucket. They call it ABS here, but there's like an old fortify bucket, and that old fortify bucket cannot be effectively reduced, which makes it super strong. I think it's weakened on here. No, I don't know exactly where they have it on here. I don't usually use this naming convention because it's confusing to me. But we're here. Let me open up blank page and just review that because it's just probably easier to go through it this way than looking at that gross formula. But you have your damage incoming. Just quickly, you have your empower slash weaken. That's being multiplied by base damage, and then this is multiplied by old fortify, which is also known as ABS internally to the game, and then this is multiplied by fortify effects, which are affected by rend and kind of a new fortify, I guess. Like the newer fortify being fortify that has been in the game for the last 6 months. It changed around that time ago. And this old fortify bucket is the best bucket in the game to stack towards because this scales quadratically in terms of damage reduction versus these other buckets tend to not to. The empower and weaken do scale quadratically, I believe, but the reason why those aren't as good is because they're contested buckets versus this older fortify bucket is not. So those mitigation perks are actually kind of sleeper right now and are something that I would like definitely not sleep on. If you see something that is like nearly best in slot that has like strike conditioning or something like that and you're going to be applying it consistently, then it's pretty good. The ones in particular that are interesting to me, I think strike conditioning is interesting because flails tend to proc that a lot. I think thrust conditioning is really good for kill squad oriented builds because there's just so much thrust there. I know people that are running like 30% gems and then they're running 5 thrust conditioning, so they're getting to 50% old fortify, which effectively doubles your HP versus those builds. And some people, because they're effectively doubling his HP, and that's the matchup that they are particularly going against a lot, are even considering dropping health uh, for this conditioning oriented effect now, because uh, it can help you if you have very specific matchups that you're warding against. So in those like kind of wide fight situations, like those OPR situations where you're versus like 15 bows and like 5 fire staffs or something stupid like that, you can just ward versus the fire, you can ward versus the thrust, and because you're only warding the two against those two types, you're effectively going to get more HP by going for this conditioning setup if you're accurate with it. If you're not accurate with it, it will be worse than health, but if you're accurate with it, this can be better than health too, which is very interesting. With that being said, we'll see you guys in the next video.